Welcome. I am Terry Tropin, and today I am presenting a lesson on using the ICD-10-CM Neoplasm Table. Let me start with information about myself. I have a master's in healthcare administration informatics from the University of Maryland Global Campus, and I have RHIA and CCSP certifications. Also, I am an AHIMA-approved ICD-10 trainer. I have taught health information technology at Montgomery College in Maryland for over 20 years. I also have written books on coding. These books are study guides that summarize the coding guidelines. My books include one on E&M coding, ICD-10-CM coding, ICD-10-PCS coding, and external cause coding. These are available on Amazon. So let's get started. This is what the neoplasm table looks like. It includes 7 columns. It is located directly after the alphabetic index in your ICD-10-CM book. In column 1, to the far left of your page, over here, is the alphabetic list of body areas, such as appendix, cartilage, intestine, which may have the neoplasm. The second column lists a code for the primary malignancy in that area. The next column lists a code for a secondary malignancy in that area. The fourth column is carcinoma in situ, then benign, uncertain behavior, and unspecified behavior in that specific area. Note that many of these codes will have a dash after the code number. Don't forget, you need to refer to the tabular list and find the correct additional digits. So neoplasms. The type of neoplasm is in the tabular list is in different sections according to the type. Malignant neoplasm C00, C96. Carcinoma in situ D00, D09. Benign neoplasms D10 to D36 plus D3A, uncertain behavior D37, D48, and unspecified behavior D49. So I always like to start out with a definition of terms. Most of these I'm sure you know. Benign is a non-cancerous growth. Carcinoma in situ is cancer, but it hasn't yet spread to nearby tissue. Primary malignancy is the original site where the cancer was diagnosed. Note that if the documentation doesn't state that it's a secondary or metastatic site, assume that it's primary. The secondary site is metastatic cancer, cancer that is spread to this site from the primary site. Uncertain behavior and unspecified behavior are the ones that sometimes prove tricky. Uncertain behavior is tissue that has some characteristics of benign cells, but also has some characteristics of cancerous cells. This is when the pathologist says, okay, let's wait and see what happens. Uncertain behavior is documented by the pathologist. This is a pathology term. Unspecified behavior, on the other hand, just means there's not enough documentation to select a code, to select a column to use. Now, what's confusing, most confusing part of neoplasms is finding them in the index. Sometimes you look up in the neoplasm table, sometimes you look up in the alphabetic index, sometimes you go to the alphabetic index and it refers you to the neoplasm table. So we're going to talk about each one of those and give some examples. So let's start out with neoplasm only. These are the relatively easy ones. You just need to refer to the neoplasm, find the right column, find the code, you're done. Look to the tabular list, of course, to make sure, but that's all you need to do. The documentation may simply state malignancy of the breast, benign neoplasm of the brain, carcinoma in situ of the stomach, neoplasm uncertain behavior of the lung. In these cases, you go directly to the neoplasm table, find the column, use that code. Now, in other cases, sometimes you need to look up a term in the alphabetic index, and then it refers you to the neoplasm table. This is most often in the cases of use a type of tissue, a histology. In many instances, the alphabetic index listing will refer you back to the neoplasm table. So start with the alphabetic index, and then if it tells you to, you need to go back to the neoplasm table. The alphabetic index will indicate the type of neoplasm, benign, malignant, etc., the column in the neoplasm table that you need to use, and will refer you back to the table. So what's a histology term? Here are some examples. Carcinomas from epithelial tissue, adenocarcinomas, epithelial glandular tissue, sarcoma, connective tissue, lymphomas, lymphatic tissue, leukemia, white blood cells, myeloma, bone marrow, fibromas, fibrous connective tissue, melanoma, the melanin cells. The alphabetic index, you start with the histology term and the alphabetic index. In most cases, not all, it will refer you back to the neoplasm table. The index will state, see also neoplasm. This means go to the neoplasm table. It doesn't specifically say table, but that's what it means. On the other hand, sometimes you look up the histological term and find a code listed. In this case, you don't need to go back to the neoplasm table. The following slides give you some examples. In the alphabetic index, find adenoma. This refers to glandular structures in the epithelial tissue. In the alphabetic index, there are many indented terms. These are just some examples. Acidophil, if there's a specific site, then it refers you back to the neoplasm table. So if it says of axillary, for example, you go back to the neoplasm table and look at that specific site. So you're not going to use the terms adenoma or the acidophil. You're going to just look up the site. On the other hand, if it says unspecified site, you're going to use this code, and you don't need to go to the neoplasm table at all. It's interesting, under here in the bile duct, it gives you specific codes for specific areas, common, extrahepatic, intrahepatic. Gives you specific codes. You don't need to go back to the neoplasm table. If it gives you, it says specific site NEC, so it gives you a specific site, but that specific site is not common, extrahepatic, intrahepatic. In that case, you go back to the neoplasm table and find that NEC site and use that code. If there's an unspecified site, you use the D13.9. So sometimes you go to the neoplasm table and sometimes you don't. That's what excuse me, that's what makes this confusing. So let's look at this one. In the alphabetic index, look up schwannoma. Schwannoma is a neoplasm involving the peripheral nervous system. The entries under this listing refer you to the neoplasm, but to different columns. That's why it's so important to look these up in the alphabetic index, so you know which column to use in the neoplasm table. For example, if it's malignant, it tells you see neoplasm nerve malignant. If it says rhombolomyoblastic differentiation, then it also refers you to the column for malignant in the neoplasm table. Remember, see neoplasm means see the neoplasm table. On the other hand, if it says melanocytic or pigmented, go to the neoplasm table and use the column for benign. So it really depends on the circumstances. Okay, so here's the practice. If you want to play along with the practice, listen to the question and then stop the recording. After you selected your codes, start up the recording to check your answers. Physician documents medullary carcinoma with amyloid stroma of the left lung. So where are we going to start? The alphabetic index or the neoplasm table? We're going to start at the alphabetic index. So we're going to find carcinoma medullary with amyloid stroma. It says specific site, see neoplasm malignant by site, and we have a specific site in this case. It's the left lung. So I'm going to go back to the neoplasm table and find lung malignant, C34.9. You see that it has that dash there, so you need to go to the tabular list to see that C34.92 is correct. Sometimes you only use the alphabetic index. Following are some examples. So in the alphabetic index, find myeloma. It says myeloma multiple, C90.0 is the default code. Monostatic, C90.3, plasma cells, solitary, plasmacytoma, solitary, C90.3. So these give you the code in the alphabetic index, and you don't need to go to the neoplasm table. Now you do need to go to the tabular list to get the final digit for these, but you don't need to use the neoplasm table at all. So here's another practice. Again, turn it off after I read the question and try doing it yourself. Follicular myeloma, grade 3A, lymph nodes of head, face, and neck. So where are we going to start? That's the first thing you should ask yourself with these. Where are we going to start, the alphabetic index or the neoplasm table? So we're going to start at the alphabetic index. And you know what? You have a code there. You don't have to go to the neoplasm table at all. You do go to the tabular list to see that a final digit 1 is added to C82.31 for head, face, and neck. So tabular alphabetic list only. Leukemia is also coded using only the alphabetic index. So look up leukemia in the index and you see a long list of indented terms. None of these terms refer you to the neoplasm table. So here's another practice. Again, stop the recording after I read it and try coding this yourself. Physician documents plasma cell leukemia. Patient was improving but now has relapsed. So where are we going to start? The alphabetic index or the neoplasm table? We start and end at the alphabetic index. So look up leukemia plasma cell, which refers you to C90.1. In the tabular list, you see that you need a digit 2 to indicate the relapse. Sometimes the documentation will list something very vague, such as mass, lump, or lesion. Often it's something that's going to be followed up at a later visit, but at this point, all we know is that it's mass, lump, lesion. This is not the same as a neoplasm. So look up the term used in the documentation, mass, lump, lesion, and that will list a code there. So you don't have it to do with the neoplasm table at all. For example, in the index, if you look up a lump in breast, find lump breast, which refers you to N63.0, which is totally outside of the neoplasm chapter. But that's all the information you have at this point. So here's another practice. Again, turn off the recording and try to code it yourself. Mass in neck, unknown whether malignant at this time. Further test will be performed. So where do we start? We start at the alphabetic index. So in the alphabetic index, find mass, neck, which refers you to R22.1. Primary site unknown. This is a very common mistake that a student will forget to do the unknown primary or secondary site. Neoplasm table includes an entry for unknown site or unspecified site. This is in the table. The patients being seen for a secondary site is noted that there's a primary site, but the primary site is not listed. That's the most common case. It could be the other way around. But you need to list a code for the primary site saying, we know there's a primary site, but it's not documented where it is. So unknown site or unspecified, unknown primary site, unknown secondary, unknown carcinoma in situ, unknown benign, unknown certain, unknown unspecified. So here's one more practice. Cut off the recording and try it yourself. Patient has metastatic cancer of the pleura. There's no information on primary site, no indication that it's been excised or otherwise treated. So we're thinking it's still there. We just don't know where. So in this case, you need two codes. C78.2 for the pleura. So you go to the neoplasm table since we know it's cancer. We know it's metastatic. So go to the neoplasm table, pleura, and use the column for secondary. This is C78.2. We also need to list a code for the primary cancer, neoplasm table, unknown site, which refers you to C80.1. Now, there is no way that someone can remember all of the ICD-10 guidelines. So therefore, it's very important to write notes in your book to jog your memory. You don't want to be thumbing through the guidelines during a test or a certification exam. If you have something written in your book, it's right there. You don't need to find it. Here's some suggestions on writing for the neoplasm codes. I would circle unknown site or unspecified. As I said, this is very often missed, and if it's circled, it will remind me, oh yeah, I need to do that. In the page before the table, you might want to write in definitions of carcinoma in situ, uncertain behavior, and unspecified behavior. So therefore, you don't have to find them. You don't have to go through your notes. It's right there in your book. So that completes the lesson. If you have questions or comments, please feel free to contact me. If you'd like a copy of these slides, just ask. So how do you contact me? I'm on Facebook at Coding Teacher. You can reach me by email at my college email. I also remind you that I have books on Amazon, and here's the link to that. It might be easiest to find them to go to Amazon Books and type in Tropin, and that way you'll get all of these will pop up. That's Tropin, T-R-O-P-I-N. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this lesson. I will have more coming soon. Thank you.